Good evening, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? Really nice to see everyone. Thank you for coming. A warm welcome to you all. My name is Emma Redding, and I have the privilege of serving as the current director of the VCA. And I'd like to start by inviting you to join me in acknowledging that we are meeting this evening on the lands of the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. And I'd like us to pay our respects to their ancestors and elders, past, present, and those who are yet to come. Let's remember that for thousands and thousands of years, people have been creating stories, telling their stories, dancing their dances, singing their songs, meeting, collaborating, coming together. And I'd like us to acknowledge, in particular, all First Nations people who are here this evening, including those who we have the pleasure of working with and learning from. So tonight's talk is the second talk in the series, the Directors' Dialogue series, that form part of the VCA's 50th anniversary celebrations. And as we contemplate the next 50 years for the VCA, it's important that we review our values and have these sorts of conversations. And I joined the VCA because of really what the VCA is and what it can be. So it's important that we have difficult conversations, that we ask difficult questions, and that we listen as well. Tonight's topic is a really important one. It's a serious one, and it's highly relevant. And we have a cracking lineup of speakers, I'm sure you'll agree, that span artistic practice, theatre, music, dance, performance, science, education, research, visual arts, and also the student body. So I'd like us to start by introducing Associate Professor Dr. Chris Mead, who is going to be chairing the conversation. And Chris, you've got so many achievements I have to look down and read from my script and put on my glasses. So Chris is head of theatre here at the Victorian College of the Arts. He has had 20 years of experience in theatre. He was the inaugural Artistic Director of Playwriting Australia, the literary manager of Sydney Theatre Company, also producing its Wharf Too Loud art form development programme, literary manager of Belvoir Street Theatre, curator of the Australian National Playwrights Conference, and the senior reader for Griffin Theatre Company. Chris is a regular judge for Premier's Literary and other literary awards. He sat on the curatorial panel for the Australian Theatre Forum in 2011, the board of Theatre Network Victoria, Arena Theatre Company, and on the artistic directorate of Hot House Theatre. In 2009, Chris was selected as one of Sydney's 100 creative catalysts. He was twice Festival Director of World Interplay, the International Festival of Young Playwrights. Awarded an inaugural Dramaturgy Fellowship from the Australia Council, Chris was selected to attend New Visions, New Voices at Washington, D.C.'s Kennedy Center. He recently completed a fantastic book, Wondrous Strange, with Currency Press, on the writing of new plays. Over to you, Chris.
Oh, thanks, Emma. I too would like to acknowledge that we're on a land with a history, an embodied cultural history of the Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, acknowledging the Wurundjeri people, elders past, present, and First Nations people here today, and commit myself to a process of deep listening. Now, you may be wondering what on earth I'm doing here. A cisgendered, beardy old white guy and beneficiary of enormous privilege at a talk on diversity. While I have much to say that's very sympathetic to other old beardy white guys, I'm really just here housekeeping and facilitating this panel of just such enormous calibre. But I just thought I'd share 3 reasons maybe also why I'm here. As you've just heard, I've been a dramaturg in the theatre industry for the last 20 years, most recently at Melbourne Theatre Company, and that's someone who's in between. Someone in between a writer, a director and actors, in between a show and an audience, in between a writer and an institution, between institutions themselves, between creatives and administrators, between history and the present, between formal rigour and wild innovation, between talking and silence. Someone used to working slowly, respectfully, but existing on a series of fault lines. I've also been fortunate to have commissioned many, many artists to write new plays and employed many, many artists to turn those plays into thrilling theatre. And much of that has been plays of inter and cross-cultural exchange, many led by First Nations artists and people of colour, plays that examine and dramatise change, because that's fundamentally what theatre is, change in real time in 4 dimensions. Plays that privilege new ways of telling and sharing stories. And finally, I think I'm here as someone who talks a lot to shut up. People like me, God, maybe even me, can and should, must listen. And as a result, change things, create opportunities for all voices to be resourced to welcome, respect and celebrate difference, and to understand better how bodies, politics and economics intersect. By way of prefacing this conversation, in 1911, my grandpa, not really, but US philosopher and proto-psychologist George Herbert Mead upended the official US motto, E pluribus unum, out of many one, by saying that society was in fact, and consciousness itself, was actually consisted entirely of unity in diversity. Now, words shift and change, and I do think we have a working understanding of society and its kind of roiling vibrancy, of diversity and its multiplicity, especially via the prisms of accessibility, inclusion and inclusivity. But there's a newish word on our radar that most especially recasts the notion of unity, and it's intersectionality. It's hardly new, but it's worth reviewing briefly. As to a definition, being wary, of course, of anyone like me looking to limit or define what a word might mean, the research director of the Diversity Council of Australia referred to intersectionality recently as a double or triple whammy, threat, or as triple jeopardy. That is, it's a metaphor about the different parts of each of us and how they can lead sometimes to more or more often less opportunity. That is, that intersectionality relates to the ways in which different aspects of a person's perceived identity can expose them to overlapping forms of discrimination and marginalisations. Attitudes, systems and structures in society and organisations can correspond, intersect and interact to create inequality, resulting in exclusion. When these aspects or characteristics come together, there is a greater risk of people experiencing family violence. People find it harder to get the help they need due to systemic barriers. And there's increased risk of social isolation, violence and death. It's a framing problem. Often our viewpoints are partial and distorted, especially so when it comes to stereotypes of race, culture, ethnicity, gender, age, disability, sexuality, clothing, height, class, handedness, accent, religion. Scholarship points to the word itself being deployed initially by legal, civil rights and racism scholar Professor Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 80s, most particularly in her paper Demarginalising the Intersection of Race and Sex. In May 2019, Professor Crenshaw wrote that the point of intersectionality is to make room for, quote, more advocacy and remedial practices in order to create a more egalitarian system. Intersectionality, according to Crenshaw, is intended to ask a lot of individuals, organisations and movements alike, requiring that efforts to address one form of oppression take others into account. Racism, heteronormativity, transphobia, ableism, xenophobia, misogyny, elitism. Deep, particular and unique overlapping social, economic and political challenges. Intersectionality has gathered much commentary since, but a question for us here is how we respond to its challenges as a major institution, but also as colleagues, citizens, teachers, witnesses. If we can't see a problem, we can't fix a problem, but also don't be fearful of not knowing the answer to things. That's something I, for one, gave up years ago. This panel is an opportunity to ask, are we attending for all of our students to their intersecting commitments and communities? Are these environments where anyone can thrive actually? What do our disciplines of dance, theatre, music, film and TV, literature, art, history, what do they look like with a renewed understanding of rigour, agility and knowledge transmission? On what patterns of recognition do we rely currently? And how can we best incorporate new facts and all peoples into the further development of ways of thinking, making, and doing? For lovers of Latin, Levinus and Maimonides' 11th century Guide for the Perplexed, we may seek guidance in the Curatorship Scendi, the responsibility of being in the world, in unconditional hospitality, in an ethic of care, or perhaps as observed presciently by US scholar, practitioner Amy Ray. You may know her from the album, 1994's album, Swampophilia. She's one of the Indigo Girls, writing not in Latin. I said, it's all in our hands. Got to learn respect what we don't understand. We are the fortunate ones, I swear. It's my great pleasure to introduce the panel, but also to give you a sense of running order. First up, we have Anthea, then Johannes, then Tristan, and Derek, who joins us from the Netherlands. Good morning, Derek. He just made a cup of tea. And then we're finishing with Alison. It was a kind of oolong, wasn't it? Yeah. They'll each speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll have about 15, 20 minutes for a discussion and take questions for the last 10 or 15 minutes, and we're out by 7:45. That's it from me, but almost I say it's it from me, but I'll just quickly introduce everybody. Dr. Anthea Skinner. Anthea is an ethnomusicologist who specialises in disability music culture and education, organology and heritage archiving. Anthea is currently a Mackenzie postdoc research fellow in the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music. Anthea has published their research in prestigious journals, including Disability and Society and Sexualities, and has chapters in books published by Cambridge University Press and New South Wales University Press. Anthea is also a member of the all-disabled Bear Brass Asylum Orchestra, whose debut music video won the 2013 Judges' Choice Award at the Focus on Ability Film Festival. Anthea has organised themed sessions and concerts representing the deaf and disability communities for the Musicological Society of Australia and the Australian Society of Archivists. Anthea's research into disability music focuses on professional musicians with disability, their creative output and career pathways, as well as adaptive musical instrument design. I can't wait to hear about that. Anthea is currently the coordinator of Melbourne Youth Orchestra's Adaptive Music Bridging Program, providing instrumental music education to children with disability. Please welcome Anthea. I think everybody's worth celebrating, don't you? So, Ioannis Sideropoulos. Ioannis is an actor, dancer, teacher, artistic creator, director, writer, and PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne. Ioannis' research focuses on performing arts, physical theatre and dance, and cognitive neuroscience, specifically on performance improvisation and brain activity. The research project is funded by the Melbourne Research Scholarship and the A.G. Leventis Foundation. Ioannis serves on several university committees, including the Higher Degrees by Research Committee, FAM Student Support Committee, the South Bank Library Committee, and the University Misconduct Committee. Please welcome Ioannis. Tristan Harwood. Tristan is an Indigenous writer, art critic, editor, and educator. His work informed by ecofeminism, critical Indigenous studies, and decolonial theory, with a particular interest in ambiguous grief, wounded attachment, discomfort, and hybridity. Tristan is a sessional lecturer in drawing and printmaking at the VCA, a current Next Chapter recipient, and his writing is published in the Saturday Paper, the New York Times, Art and Australia, Overland Journal, Art Review, El Malpasante, and elsewhere. He also lectures and tutors on ecological and public art at RMIT, is co-editing 2 forthcoming books, just 2, on art history, and finishing his own poetry collection. Alongside writing, teaching, and editing, Tristan has worked in Indigenous student support, research, and mentoring roles. Tristan will be commencing a new full-time role in critical and theoretical art in the School of Art at the VCA beginning next year. Please welcome Tristan. Dr. Derek Brown, who's trying not to sip his tea, is a sport performance nutritionist, performance science lecturer and researcher, and is program manager of a postgraduate program in dance studies at the Institute of Sport Science, University Bern, Switzerland. Derek completed a doctorate at the University of Rabud, Donda's Institute for Brain Cognition and Behaviour in Cognitive Science and Motor Control, and is an associate editor for the Journal of Dance Medicine and Science. Derek's publications include a systematic review of individual differences in perception, action and decision-making, implications for dance education, dance exposure, individual characteristics and injury risk over 5 seasons in a professional ballet company, gender diversity, sexual orientation and bone health in the maturing dancer, individual differences in sequential movement coordination in hip-hop dance, capturing joint articulation in practicing the wave, and nutritional considerations for the vegetarian and vegan dancer. Derek, as I said, is zooming into us this evening from the Netherlands and just gave us, during the sound check, a little bit of Dutch. Hello, Derek. Professor Alison Campbell is in theatre at the Victorian College of the Arts. Alison is a freelance director and dramaturg with a 30-year career in teaching credits that feature the School of Creative Arts, University of Melbourne, Queen's University Belfast and Brunel University London. Their research, teaching and activism focuses on gender and sexuality, particularly queer dramaturgy. She literally wrote the book on queer dramaturgy, and HIV/AIDS in performance. What excites Alison about the field of dramaturgy, woohoo, is the thoughtfulness that is part of a dramaturgical consciousness. It's often slow, a slow process of research, rumination and questioning, and the excitement is in discovering new forms and collaborators who make your heart sing a little and help you work out what it means to be alive now. Please welcome Alison. Over to you, Dr. Anthea.
Thank you. Hi. Well, as you all know now, I'm Dr. Anthea Skinner, and I'm a musicologist and a Mackenzie postdoctoral research fellow here at the Victorian College of the Arts. And as you all know, I specialise in disability music, and you would have seen as you came in a collaboration between myself and the wonderful dancer Dr. Melinda Smith and Dr. Alon Ilsar from Monash University. And that was a music and dance collaboration that we put together, and you would have seen all of the sound that was sort of in that clip was coming from a musical instrument that was adaptive musical instrument that was attached to her wrist, and that's called the Air Sticks, and that comes out of Sensi Lab at Monash University. Anyway, I'm here to talk to you today about the wonderful things that people who are deaf, disabled and neurodivergent have done at the Victorian College of the Arts, are doing at the Victorian College of the Arts, and will continue to do. But before I do, I really need to acknowledge the elephant in the room when I talk about disability at VCA, and that is the fact that our campus is still wildly inaccessible. In fact, our whole university is wildly inaccessible. I started working here in February, and there have literally been times when I've been in tears trying to get around this campus. It's rough. It took us a while as a university to figure out the importance of access. But it's not all doom and gloom. There is positive change, and I've seen it in the short time I've been here, and I almost see it every week when I come in as things change and things are being adapted for me. On the first day that I arrived, there was a whole team of workers putting in literally tens of thousands of dollars worth of automatic doors through my building, through the neighbouring 2 buildings, so that I could get my chair around relatively easily. And as a new employee on your first day, and a relatively junior new employee, that's pretty intimidating, let me tell you. But, you know, the way I have to look at it, my job is to collaborate with other disabled people. I am bringing them into the university, and there will be many after I leave. And now they can get around my building. And it's not just that, because universal design is universal. The amount of people who've said to me since my doors went in, oh my God, I can carry my tuba anywhere on the floor now, you know. I can come from the library and it doesn't matter how many books I'm carrying, I don't have to drag open those horrible soundproof doors. It makes a difference to everyone. And while we're talking about those changes, this is my place to publicly admit, I'm not sure if the Dean is here, but I need to publicly admit that I'm the reason that the Dean's car park was moved. I think she already knows, because, you know, there are not many wheelchair users on campus. But, you know, I asked the wonderful people at Properties, you know, could I please have an accessible spot near my office? And the next thing I knew, they were painting over the Dean's car park and putting a big access sign on it. Again, I was a little intimidated. It's like, please don't fire me. It's my by that stage, it was my 3rd week. But, you know, it actually goes to show how seriously we are starting to take access. You know, a little lowly, you know, early career researcher gets to steal the Dean car park because I need it. And making these changes, and we are making these changes, is important, not just because it's a legal requirement, although it is. And it's not just important because it's a good thing to do for the little cripples, although it is. It's important because people who are deaf, disabled and neurodivergent have so much to offer, not just VCA, but our entire culture. Because I don't know whether you know this, but in the arts, and indeed in research, no one ever got any points for being just like everybody else. The real key to being a great artist or a great researcher is the ability to look at something from a slightly different angle. And it's having something to say. And that's really important because people with disability, people who are deaf and neurodivergent, we have so much to tell you. And when I talk about seeing things from a slightly different angle, I'm going to use myself as an example. I feel like we're bonded here a little bit, you know. So just between you, me and the internet, hi internet, I'm missing actually a fairly large part of my brain. So I still have to do all the same things you do. And I still have to process all the same information that you do. But I physically do it with a different part of my brain. I don't know how that affects my personality. My doctors don't know. I certainly don't know how it affects my research, and I don't know how it affects my music making. But I do know that people find me, let's say, eccentric. Let's be nice about it. And I do know that my colleagues often seem to be surprised and delighted by the ideas that I have. And that's a real asset in what I do in my job. Because my damaged, broken brain, it can do things that yours can't. And that's really important. And I'm not the only one. And I know this partly because my job is studying disabled musicians from history. And I tell you what, disabled artists have been here since forever. And you can look at the history of the VCA, the glorious 50-year history of the VCA, and even though we're a very inaccessible workplace, getting better, but still inaccessible, we have a wonderful history of deaf, disabled and neurodivergent artists, students, graduates, former and current staff members. I'm talking about people like Tim Ferguson, like Shel DiStefano, like Claire Bridge, like Anna Helm, and like the wonderful Melinda Smith, who you just saw this evening as you walked in, who's about to sign her contract with us. And that's really important. And so before I go, I just want to very quickly have a little word to those of you who are in positions of power here at VCA, or indeed in any cultural organisation. And that's to ask you to take a moment to hear our voices. Because right now, the next Frida Kahlo, or Evelyn Glennie, or Peter Dinklage could be preparing their audition, or their folio, or their job application. And if you fail to hear them because you think their disability is going to make it harder to employ them or to have them study here, then not just the VCA misses out, but our entire culture misses out. Because people with disability, we have so much to tell you. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthea. Johannes.
Hi, hello everyone. So my name is Ioannis, and it's a great pleasure to be invited here and kick this talk with my wrong name on the screen, but ignore it. You can see it here. So what you've experienced here now, it wasn't me showing off my style or my fashion. It was just what we actors or performers, we're being through every time we go into an audition. Sitting in front of a camera, having to smile, turn around, show our body skills, and then comes the voice and the sound. And more importantly, as I've experienced the last years I'm living in Australia, it's all about the accent. So it's all about where your accent is from and how do you sound, how your voice is sound and your accent is sound, despite if you are a very good actor or a very good performer or a dancer, which dance is a little bit slightly different because it's more on the body. But surprisingly, experiencing so much non-inclusive environment because I have a thick accent. I'm a proud Greek person, I'm a European, and I proudly got accepted to come to the VCA and the University of Melbourne to do my PhD. And I found this place has been advertised as a very inclusive and enormously open environment, and creating the expectation on its own from outside. Oh my God, an amazing campus only for performing arts and music, which is so isolating one from another. When you carry a label that you are a PhD, even in a research level in dance, that means you are a dancer. You can't be an actor. When you're a PhD in theater, that means you're an actor. You can't be a musician. And when you are in music, that means you play an instrument and you do not perform. So that's kind of my slightly quick introduction about my vast, weird, open experiences I had as an actor coming here and trying to find agents. I've been to a couple of agents, and also some of my colleagues and friends that they are also actors or performers. They experienced in the same agents completely different experiences because of their pictures or their age or mainly, once again, the accent. So I am curious to know why, after living in 6 different countries, I speak 3 languages and plus Greek, which is my mother tongue. And I quite openly worked in different other countries as a performer, as an actor, not in my own language and not in English. Why it is so important here that the accent says it all, and I don't even have the chance to show my skills. And because I really believe in the power of education, and because VCA turned 50 and we are looking for ahead, and we talk a lot about the indigenous history here and the history of this land, that I am very thankful of the first people I met here. Among them, some, they are here. They really put me in the history of indigenous people through dance or through theater. And I've really learned the history of this place. I'm just wondering why we're not looking back and learn more about the history. I'm coming from a country that, according to statistics, is number 1, after Italy, before Italy, in history. And we learn a lot about history from our history. So believing in the power of education, I feel that VCA, especially as now it's included in the University of Melbourne, has lost a little bit of its confidence. And you feel this being part of VCA because it's so disconnected sometimes, the disciplines. I don't know if this is part of the politics or the policies or all those kind of things involved in academia and university, which I understand. But in a performing arts sector and environment, it's very weird that even us, the international students, that we have the really big label and tick the boxes, we're not even being used in a good way to offer our skills and experiences, to show who we are and what we want to bring, and people take from us, and take despite our accent, despite our color, despite of ticking those boxes for the beginning of the semester and then being invisible for a very long time. So yeah, my time is running up, and I hope that I gave you a brief, quick sense of what's going on in my mind about my sense of diversity and inclusion. And thank you very much for listening to me and inviting me to be part of this great panel.
Thanks, Alex. Tristan.
Great. Yeah, I don't really know where to start. I kind of want to engage Ioannis on what you're saying about accents. And as from an Indigenous perspective, that really resonates with me. I grew up speaking English, but Aboriginal English, so inflected with a really specific accent, using English words in a very specific way, like if there's any black fellas in the audience, like, you know, like the word gammon, which is obviously an English word but has another inflection, various things. And, you know, I am not really speaking like that right now, and like I do this thing where I code switch when I come here, so I talk in a slightly different accent to exist in a space like this. And yeah, like in addition to, I guess, that point, like being not from this place, my family's from up north, but you know, the fact is, like, everyone speaking English is speaking with an accent already that is inherently foreign to this place. So it's quite alarming and perturbing that, like, you've had that experience here. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of engage you on that. And where I was going to start before I heard that was, and I guess always at the start, I acknowledge the traditional owners, the Bunurong and the Wurundjeri as well, and any blackfellas or Indigenous people in the audience. And that's not just to acknowledge you, but when I teach or when I write, I'm always writing as though there are Indigenous people in the room. And that's a really important practice for me, and I think that is something that can easily be translated to anyone's practice as well. And Derek, you asked what the season was when we were in sound check, and so the Kulin word for the season is Porneet, which is like tadpole season, so somewhat self-explanatory, lots of tadpoles, but like along the rivers just down the road from here, all the yellow and the purple and the like whites of the flowers are all out in bloom. So it's like spring, but it's not quite spring. It's very specific to this location. And so yeah, I guess going from there, I might just do a bit of my background, which is I initially wrote that bio thing myself that was read before. It was meant to sound much more outside of the university, because I kind of wanted to talk about the role that I'm coming into. But yeah, it kind of just sounded standard kind of university stuff in the end. So I'll talk a little bit about where and how I grew up. So I'm like the oldest of 7 children, a single mother, on welfare family. My mother dropped out of high school to have me. My grandmother is a second generation stolen generation, so my great grandmother was also taken. And yeah, it's quite bizarre to be here, particularly with 50 years of the VCA. Like, university felt like such a, not unattainable, but just because it was like not in the realm of like my social reality at the time. So it's quite weird that I'd be here. And it's also, quite strange that I am going into a full-time ongoing position in CATS next semester, because I don't have a PhD, I don't have a master's. I kind of wrangled my way into an undergraduate degree at Melbourne Uni, and have just, I guess, following other Indigenous people and also working in a lot of, often collaborating with, I don't call them allies, I call them accomplices, because it's like, I want you to be going down with me if we're going to go down. I don't want you like cheering on the side. But yeah, accomplices who have been able to acknowledge undisciplined knowledge, and I think that is something that's really kind of key within the space of the university. And I'm running low on time, but yeah, I guess now being in the university, one thing that I would just really love to see and like love to have the university commit to is something like the university has prerequisites around literacy, expected prior learning, Why not have that around a level of racial literacy? And if people aren't coming into the university with that kind of racial literacy, the university as a whole should be teaching that. It shouldn't be something that falls onto, in an ad hoc way, onto individual lecturers and tutors to teach students those things. And it's really just not an outlandish idea at all to teach that across the university when the university teaches mandatory breadth courses in things like wine tasting. And it's laughable because it's like, what does that say about the kinds of like quote unquote citizens that the university wants to produce? Like when they're doing things like wine tasting instead of something more substantive. But yeah, I'll wrap up.
All right, thanks, Tristan. Yes, there could be wine in your teacup there, Derek, but I'm sure it's a delicious oolong. Please, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I hear there's a delay, so I will try to speak slowly. So thanks for the invitation. Tristan sort of set me up quite well there, so I get to be an agent provocateur. I am a person of multiple nationalities, identities, and othernesses. Last week, perchance, I had the opportunity to participate in a faculty workshop at the Amsterdam University of the Arts, where I currently lecture on the Master of Arts education degree. The workshop was facilitated by speaker, scholar, and storyteller Aminata Cairo. So Google that name when you get home. Particularly relevant for this provocation and tonight's discussion was her eloquent unraveling of the lived experiences of being dominant or the other. Think parent to child, educator to student, employee to employer, all at the individual level. However, as Chris alluded to in the beginning, where the interplay of dominant and other is most challenging is when individuals go up against institutions, a collective of fill in the blanks, cisgender, or to use Chris's word, BD. The former is almost always the other, whilst the latter always dominant. So this is a little of my introduction for myself tonight, my skew, my bias, my frame of how and which way I'm entrenched, how I intertwine, how I interact at the intersex or the smaller intersees of what it means to be an individual working in higher education. When reflecting on intersection dynamics, what happens on institutional campuses in student, faculty, staff relationships, to student-student moments, or in academic programming, when historically underrepresented groups of others arrive on university campuses to work and study alongside their majority group dominant counterparts. Put more plainly, what are the barriers or walls that restrict and regulate race, gender, class, physicality, and sexuality differently? Hashtag these, as Chris alluded to, as the isms. Thinking about the pamphlet, as Ioannis sort of alluded to as well, often describing inclusiveness as simply a matter of recognizing our plurality and views and experiences on society. So treating isms, if you will, as this sort of benevolent categories that foster diverse experiences instead of what they often are, codified systems of malignant power that produce social inequality. Inclusivity does not mean treating all the same when we clearly all face different institutional challenges. Unfortunately, treating everyone the same is often code for treating everyone as if we all experience the world in the same way as the average, dominant, cis, white individual. We must certainly celebrate, as we are doing tonight, all of the work that's done across university campuses in the world. However, valuing performativity of being inclusive may conceal from sight what the institution is not doing. We must diligently separate the institution's PR machine, which enhance its dominant reputation and position, from what happens at the individual level. And yes, if you have not heard from every single individual on your campus who is underrepresented, you have not yet done the work. Our current zeitgeist of our time is that of being woke. However, being awake is simply another state of consciousness, like daydreaming. However, being attentive, this requires much more work, much more visceral, visible work. This VCA director dialogue is a continuation of work that has happened in other places, and listening to the panel tonight is starting to happen. And hopefully it will continue after our discussion tonight. Thanks for the invitation to engage with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Derek. Dr. Allison.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Emma, for the invitation. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and any First Nations and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here this evening, or who will watch our recorded thing. I'm a queer woman. I start the year by saying that, and I find it amazing that I get to say that. It means, and I've been invited to say it not just to my one little group of dramaturgs or whoever, but actually then to the whole theatre school, and then it became the whole faculty and things like that. I don't take it for granted. I've certainly been in institutions where I've been looked on with horror at the nature of the research that I do. So I'll say it. I'm a queer woman. That means that I'm queer identifying in my teaching, in my research, as a theatre maker, and I see them all as a form of activism as well. I'm also cis, white, an immigrant, part of a queer diaspora. I am low femme, which this joke I've used so many times. It means I love the lipstick, hate the heels. What it also means is that I pass very easily. So I do tend to wear, themed T-shirts and things, so that just in case people missed the point. But I also know the privileges that then come to me, not just with my whiteness, with my extraordinarily privileged education that I have had, but also the fact that I can pass through the world and not have the same aggressions that come to my partners or friends who are, who are gender diverse or fucking with gender or trans and are having to navigate the world that is not so friendly. The institutions, the academic institution is not very friendly to queer identifying people, which is weird at somewhere like the VCA when we know a huge percentage of our students and staff actually are gay or queer, LGBTQIA+, but we've still got systems and structural kind of things in place. We've got buildings with, serious issues. I'll just say it, the toilets, but other things. And also, to pick up on your point, Anthea, too, when we had to suddenly go online, our online worlds were not accessible either. So we've got all sorts of things that are making things difficult here. My work, as Chris was saying, is really around, my research and teaching really is around gender and sexuality and performance, but I suppose about 4 or 5 years ago I started to become a lot more conscious and wanted to research and write about what it was to be a queer person within the academy, largely because I was having an absolute crisis, a sort of sense of hypocrisy and alienation from my own queer community that made me think, how can I possibly stay inside this academic? What happens to my queerness? Being in here with all the privilege that it brings. And there were a series of things that brought that up. And I thought about, well, if I'm a queer academic, what does that mean? And it's clearly an oxymoron to be a queer academic if queer is against the normative and academia is about the most normative or patriarchal, heteronormative space you can find yourself in. So I had to go through a process of thinking what it is to come to terms, not just philosophically with this position that I hold here, of great privilege as a professor now, but also with what I can do in practice. So for tonight, I decided to share one of the works that really, or a couple of the works. Okay, so I'm not going to read this bit aloud after all, except that these are great intersectional writers across queering, decolonising thinking. So La Peterson writes pseudonymously. This book, A Third University is Possible, is just been one of the things that has really made me not want to burn down the house, metaphorically or literally, and run away from the academy, but to feel that I could be, as they put it, this wrecking, scavenging cyborg with an S, the queering version of this decolonising machine. Their argument being that these institutions are not monoliths that can't be changed, but that within them we are part of a system where we can actually enact some change from within. And so I've been looking at twin strategies, what we can do from inside, and that actually is a tactic of, taking the promotion, but knowing why I'm taking it. And it's not just about more money or power for myself, it's actually about knowing that it means I can sit on higher and higher committees and environments where I can go, have you thought about the queer? I am a queer person in your room. And that has made some people very uncomfortable, but that is the job, actually, as all of you are saying too. So I suppose I'm in this utopian reparative mode where I'm thinking that rather than running away, to stay in, there is a job to do, and it is actually possible. And these queer decolonising thinkers are allowing us to think through that way. So I know I'm out of time, so I'll stop there, but I have a lot to say.
Thanks, Alison. Thank you. I was at a climate change conference last week, and there was a member of Extinction Rebellion there. Some of you may have known they superglued their hands to a Picasso on the weekend. The theme running through here really powerfully is one of activism. And the person from Extinction Rebellion said that for every one person who gets arrested, they require 6 people to support them. And I thought it was a fantastic and fascinating paradigm about what activism at that level looks like. And I suppose I'm wondering from Anthea, first of all, because you prefaced your talk by describing activism at an incredibly local but super useful level. So I'm just thinking about activism from each one of you, whether it's possible to manage, I'm not saying let's start a revolution right now.
Oh, let's.
But maybe it's actually happening. And I'm wondering from your point of view what your thoughts on that kind of, there's an extraordinary responsibility, which is why it's so really privileged to be here. But often it falls on the people who carry the heaviest of burdens. So I'm wondering how, what change actually looks like, how activism makes sense to you. Is that even a useful way of thinking about change?
I think it is. And I'm very aware that for me, simply being an obviously disabled person on campus is activism in and of itself. Every one of my colleagues who wanders around here being obviously disabled, and indeed, you know, and I say that sort of very aware that the obviousness of my disability is actually a privilege. You know, you were saying you wear the t-shirts. I don't need to wear the t-shirt, you know, because it's, well. But certainly it wasn't obvious when I was growing up, you know, so that's something that I've had to sort of develop, and almost there's a cripping of my movements, you know. I can hide a lot of the ways I move that are strange if I choose to. It costs me a huge amount of energy to do it, but I certainly spent most of my 20s doing that, you know. So for me, just sort of being obvious about who I am, which is a difficult thing because you're not always obviously hiding it. I don't need you to know that I'm having a bad day or that, you know, I spent 40 minutes in the toilet this morning. That's probably too obvious. But just being here makes people ask questions. And I'm very, you know, I'm very aware. The first thing when Melinda, the dancer who you saw earlier, when she came onto campus, the first thing we did was take photos of ourselves in front of the VCA sign. Because how many photos of 2 wheelchair users do you know in front of the VCA sign exist, you know? And so I'm very aware that, you know, every one of those doors that gets replaced is another person who can come in next time and fix it. You know, we're currently fixing the toilet because I'm 6 foot tall, and the accessible toilet in the music building, I can't touch the ground when I sit on it. I'm about to bring disabled 8-year-olds into that building. It's a massive health and safety issue. This building doesn't have an accessible toilet, you know, and simply the act of saying that now here. So if any of you need one, give us 10 minutes warning, we can get you to the neighbouring building. Which is what I say at the start of every rehearsal, because I often rehearse in here, you know. So it is just that constant, and you feel like you're nagging. You know, I'm on the phone to properties all the time, you know. I'm on the phone to my head of department, I'm on the phone saying, my team can't get in. And so you feel like you're making trouble. But if I don't, who will? You know, I've got the job. I'm not fighting to get the job anymore. I'm fighting to bring the next lot in. And we will, and we are. And it's glorious.
Dr. Derek, I wanted to pick up something, and I'm fascinated to hear from you, just keeping on the idea of activism, but also around the nature of, you've worked across a number of institutions, and you discussed the nature of being entrenched. So you've worked across a number of institutions, so you have a degree of fluidity, I suppose, and an awareness of dynamism and movement, but this idea of the entrenched nature and the structures of, you know, that institutions need in order to function. And I'm wondering how activism rubs up against this nature from your point of view across different institutions.
Yeah, well, yes, of course, I work in the continent, or on the continent of the colonizer, if you will. So we could safely say that a lot of what we're discussing tonight has to do with dismantling a lot of what has happened, or what, let me put it this way, what we consider expertise. Expertise comes from our ideas about empiricism. It comes from our ideas about what it means to be an expert based on our colonial past. So that rubbing up against, if you will, that sort of sandpaper moment that has to do very much with those distinctions that institutions have, or how they define themselves. For the individual, as Anthea just beautifully demonstrated, that's never quite the same as the pamphlet. It's never quite the same as the PR that describe the university. If the toilet is not working, one could safely say that is inhuman. Yeah. Full stop. We can mask it, but we could say if you can't go do something that Abraham Maslow says is a basic human necessity, then we have gone south quite quickly as to what institutions can do for individuals. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
I'm interested, Tristan, from you, again on this question of activism and making change. In theatre, we've just had the joy of appointing a new tutor in theatre, who's a First Nations, it's a dedicated First Nations position. But we're also really clear that we didn't want that person to be the go-to person on, quick, give us the backstory on, tell us about, explain yourself. We wanted them to be a tutor in theatre.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what is that embodied experience of having to be a spokesperson and having to explain yourself, but at the same time, of course, it's an extraordinary privilege to hear stories, as Derek said, of otherness, to go, how do I recalibrate my way of thinking about the way I walk every day, where I place my feet every day?
Yeah.
And I think about that particularly in this place, about where we place our feet every day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge risk, I think, as an Indigenous scholar, black and brown, like scholars of colour, but particularly when you are moving into an identified Indigenous role as an Indigenous person, there is a certain way that you're making yourself vulnerable to become the go-to person for the kind of cultural tick of approval. But it's one you have to, I guess, take the leap of faith and, as an Indigenous scholar, if you are interested in, kind of like what Derek was saying, exfoliating the kind of barriers of the university, you kind of have to act as though your employees are acting in good faith. And I think, hearing you say that about the role, and when I was coming into the role I'm doing next year, I was told similar things, and I think that is really important in terms of not, I guess, ghettoising Indigenous scholars and Indigenous knowledges, but also, I guess, acknowledging that there's a lot that I just am not going to disclose within the university, not on an interpersonal level, like a lot of the, I guess, specific cultural knowledge, specific criticisms of Indigenous painting, etc. Though some of those things can't be disclosed within the university, as long as, I guess, the university exists in a broader capitalist system that turns knowledge into a commodity, and the university is in the act of accumulating that commodity and then trading in it themselves. So, you have to, I guess, pick and choose what you will disclose in the university. But also, I guess negotiating that dialectic of belonging and not belonging in the university is a major factor in relation to that. If I don't perform my identity in a particular way, does that mean I now belong less when I'm coming in on one of those roles? It's a tough one. I don't think that was really an answer, was it?
It was a great sharing, though. And I'd love to bring you in, Joanna, so that just that idea of belonging and not belonging, and the idea of risk as well for you. It was it was beautiful when you stood up and held up the little sign with your name. That was a huge risk to take, to do that, for us to completely objectify you, and then for you to slowly unpick that. And yet this is, in a not dissimilar way, you have to perform a particular role. But it's entirely about unpicking all of those things. I'm just wondering how that, is for you to be here to find all these barriers.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking, to be honest, to find so many barriers. Even listening about so many barriers in this fascinating panel today, and this great energy and voice you added on, literally, you touched me. And it's real. It's not emotionally it just touched me. It's very real. And I, as a gay man from Greece, that even took me years. Maybe if someone might be today saw this video live, see this as a coming out even today, because some people of my background, they don't even know, or I grew up in a small village in a very conservative religious place. But I really want to speak on the risk thing, and thank you for this, because it's very important, and I didn't have the time to elaborate more on that. This is the other shock of the university and in an artistic school, that it is advertised like this, like come here and take risks. And then when you are not able to take risks, or you're not giving the chance to take risks, then it really destroys your sense of belonging. And unfortunately, it creates another way of creating and having even questioning yourself. And then that's very wrong, especially in an era, in a post-pandemic era, that we all talk all about well-being and mental health support. And then you realize that, again, even as simple as accessible toilets, you have to put so much energy to fight about being recognized and accepted for simply who you are. Nothing more and nothing less. And then just be able to get the risks. And today, I had a great talk with a friend. She's here today. And she gave me a very great example about a kid and a tree. They say if a child wants to go on a tree, then everyone will say, no, do it. But the kid, when everyone leaves, the kid will climb. But then the best solution is the people, the teachers, academia, the university to be there, allow us to take that risk and be there to support us. And then I will end with a question, why it's so difficult this to happen?
I wonder if it's almost, take the risk and then we'll be there to support you, but you can't take the risk unless you already know you're going to be supported before you start. That's, I think almost that support, our staff need to make sure that that's a really obvious thing before we ask our students to take risks, because you can't take risks if you don't feel safe, if you don't feel like the people around you even accept who you are.
I was fascinated, Professor Allison, with your framing of it just along these lines, but in terms of wrecking and scavenging. And I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit, because there's a kind of, I'll just throw it to you.
Well, those are LePaperson's terms, but they are like that. It's been so kind of thrilling to me what it's possible to do. So I was starting to get towards and didn't finish where I was going with this kind of twin strategy, really, that I think about. One is like what you can do from inside, and I call that running interference. So that's sitting on those committees and getting onto something or other and doing that and whatever, and talking whenever you can and saying words that people don't sometimes want to hear. And the other one is thinking about this civic duty of the university, which you've brought up, Tristan, and across the panel. And that's to do with the other strategy, which is what I call going feral, which is literally to take every resource I can get from this institution. And it's very generous. It has been very generous to me, I must say, but to run wild with it. So if the feral is the domesticated run wild, I see myself absolutely as somebody who's been so utterly domesticated into the academy. I'm very at home. I'm very well treated. Why would I want to leave? And yet that was the thing. I just wanted to leave home and run away. So it's this constant balancing between, and that's where the scavenging maybe comes in to answer that one, which is to scavenge up everything you can get from here. And that's about knowing that you can apply for grants that are then going to allow you to employ queer artists, or you're going to be able to encourage the building of capacity through queer research and building a whole cohort there. That means there is some sort of real power to speak back to things. Even thinking about practices research or creative arts research, that's very much based about knowing who we are ourselves and building from there. But to be able to articulate our own work and experience is also for me a form of activism. A, who else is going to write about it? But B, because actually then you start to put it out into the world as something valid. So that wrecking and scavenging and retooling, I think they talk about as well, is literally about how you kind of look at what's here, look at all those things, and then start to find these various different angles by which you exploit them and try to use them for the civic good, I guess, so that more people might feel welcome in here eventually, and sooner rather than later, really, rather than saying eventually.
That's a perfect segue, thank you, Professor Alison. We've had about 10 minutes left. We'll throw to you. Do you have any questions? Please, can you make them questions? Comments are interesting, but we have this extraordinary panel here, so we'd love to have your questions, so please pop your hands up and fire away. Otherwise, I'll just keep on asking questions and you'll never get out.
I have a question.
Professor Emma.
I was wondering if we could just talk a bit about intersectionality specifically, because I've just been picking up on what our wonderful colleagues have been saying around PR and the university's PR, and you know, every university in the land has a diversity and inclusion committee now and an action plan and all the rest, and yet I was talking to Tira Kionis, our wonderful head of the Willins Centre for Indigenous Arts and Cultural Development, who was talking about patience and how to do this right we need to be in this for a while, and it's about patience as opposed to ticking the box. And so really what I'm saying is, when we come to sort of lists of diverse minority groups, it's not just a case of counting how many people of colour we have on our student population, because it's much more about intersectionality. And I just wanted to share some statistics actually that have been developed from the UK around this. So BAME, Black and Ethnic Minority Groups. So BAME was a term that was used in the UK for many, many years, and that's not being used anymore because it's so much more nuanced than saying people of colour are disadvantaged and people who are white are not disadvantaged, although I have to say a lot of white people are very privileged and advantaged, of course. But the Sutton Trust in 2015 came out on intersectionality, and it talked about a complex picture and how when they assessed secondary school pupils in the UK, they found that Chinese pupils from disadvantaged homes are almost 3 times as likely as white working class pupils to do well at school. So the social economic kind of status comes in. Bangladeshi, Indian, Black African and Pakistani pupils from poorer homes all perform well above the national average for disadvantaged pupils, while white working class pupils achieve the lowest grades of any main ethnic group. Disadvantaged girls perform better than disadvantaged boys, and the attainment gap is widest for Black Caribbean boys relative to girls. So it goes on just to say that this may reflect a strong appreciation of education for certain cultural groups, calling into question the catch-all phrase BAME and supporting the need for greater understanding of the intersecting factors that are at play. So I just thought that was quite interesting. I didn't know if anyone wanted to comment.
If you could turn it into a question.
How do we deal with this? Because it's not as easy as saying, let's just increase the number of people of colour. How do we do it? And Derek might have, because I know that Derek lectures on intersectionality, so you might have a comment.
Yeah, thanks Emma for segueing that. I think one of the things we can change, or 2 things we can change, is labels. What do we mean by disadvantaged? In reference to what? That's one thing we can change. And the second thing we can change as researchers is, what do we want to gain by categorizing people based on what we consider their race or where they come from? If a child happens to be Bangladeshi and also queer, that is a radically different descriptor than a child who is Bangladeshi and may consider themselves or identify in a more traditional way. That child who is queer is not included, their stories are not included in how these descriptors, how these statistics are created. So again, it comes back, and Chris sort of alluded to some of the research I do. What gets me up in the morning is always asking the question, what about the individual? The so what question. That's the question we don't ask at the institution. What about the individual? If there's a Bangladeshi kid who is queer, we wouldn't know it if we listened to those statistics. We would have no idea what that intersect looks like. So the labels are a big thing for me.
Well said.
Does another panellist want to comment on what happens, the occlusion of categories and the weakness of some of our ways of labelling people?
I think sometimes it's very easy, both from the outside and the inside, to focus on whichever community is most obvious. You know, I look very disabled, so I talk about disability. It's not my only minority group. No one ever questions when I say I'm disabled. I know friends who aren't so obviously disabled, but are just as disabled, that gets questioned all the time. And they'll sit in meetings and, you know, people will say, what should we do about those disabled people? And they'll say, we're in the room, people, you know. And the same thing, you know, and again, this is about how we label people, you know, and I guess you're in the same position. Mm. I'm a pale-skinned person of colour, which is a strange sentence, you know. But people are too busy noticing my disability most of the time, and I do research, you know, in the Malay world. That's my ethnic background. But I find it a lot easier to get listened to as a disabled person than as a Malay person, because I look like a disabled person and I don't look particularly like a Malay person.
Mm.
And is it interesting how... Sorry, Derek, you carry on.
No, just quickly, I think just to tag those two, because Tristan alluded very early in his discussion about racial literacy. And here is where that can be very informative. The stories about what we don't know about a pale-faced Malay is far more important than the label we might place on Anthea as being disabled. Because apparently, colleagues of yours will listen to that and have no clue that you intersect at that space.
And you know, and I'm pale-skinned, A, because I'm mixed race, but B, because my disability makes me more pale-skinned. It faded my skin.
So lack of melanin.
So growing up as a child, my onset of disability was about 12. No one ever questioned my race. And then I spent 10 years not going outside. And now everyone questions it. And yet I'm the same person. And my feelings towards my culture, my interaction with my culture haven't changed.
And also I think it's time to abandon the idea of labels. It was surprising a couple of years ago the amount of money that the university spent to create stickers and badges about like he, him, she. I think we are far more than a badge or a sticker. And the stickers, I don't feel they will create more empathy. No. Talking to each other, and accepting each other is in a completely different... We don't even need the labels.
And I have to say, I saw those stickers, and there's nothing wrong with them, except I was just thinking, we spent money on labels and I don't have a toilet.
Yeah.
That might be the perfect point to end tonight's discussion. Thanks so much for coming, everybody.
Can I just say
toilets.
One quick... Let's applaud them. Let's applaud them.
Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you because we've got a couple of gifts for our lovely speakers, which Tracy's going to hand out. But I'm quite overwhelmed by the calibre and experiences for our speakers. Thank you so much for sharing quite personal stories and journeys, and I really appreciate and feel quite humbled by what I've heard this evening. So thank you very much. And thank you, Chris, for chairing. Amazing, I have no doubt. Thank you, Derek, and I'm sorry we haven't got a gift for you, but I'll give you something in 2 weeks' time when I see you. But thank you, Derek.
A lot of badges we'll send you away. How's that?
And also really like to thank the crew, because there are a lot of amazing people behind the scenes making all of this happen. Of course, as everyone says, for every one person on stage, there are 10 people behind stage. And I'd like to invite you all for a drink, because you haven't spoken much, but the fact that you're here, thank you for showing up. And the fact that you've shown up means this topic is important to you. So we'd like to speak to you and have a drink with you if you're up for that. So in the old police hospital, which is the building just next to this building, you go out, turn left, and somebody will be on the security door to let you in. In the kitchen, there's
Are you saying there's a bouncer?
There's a bouncer on the door, and you're all on the list. You're all on the guest list. So please come and join us for a drink in the old police hospital. But thank you again for coming, and thank you, everybody, for taking part. Thank you.